All right. So, I decided to make this video today because I feel calm. I feel calm mentally, but I also feel that emotionally, like something is alive that I have spoken to publicly in a couple of statements that I've put on my Instagram and on my Facebook. And I felt there was a standstill after I made these comments on spiritual community, on spiritual bypassing, on connections within spiritual community, and some of the imbalances that can happen in these spaces. And the energy kind of just, it settled for a week, and the energy has come back up today. And just because I know that I will get feedback on both sides of the spectrum, and I feel mostly the people that reach out are the people that are angry with me and what I have to say. And so I do just want to state first and foremost, I'm not speaking about any one particular spiritual community. This is from living in multiple spiritual communities around the world and in spiritual spaces or healing spaces for the past 12 years of my life. And I also want to state that my opinion is not right. There is no right and wrong. I also want to state that I am imperfect and that I am not sitting on my soapbox preaching that what I'm going to say is the way or the opinion, but it simply feels as if it wants to be said. And also, I want to state that I've already thought about who am I to say anything in this space of spiritual communities and spiritual bypassing and kind of the traumatic behavior that happens in these communities. Who am I to judge that? Who am I to speak on that at all? And my only real answer to that is who am I not to speak about this? And why do you have to have a particular authority or power or title to speak out about this? Why is this not just a conversation open to everyone, and why are we not speaking about it? So I also do want to state that I have experienced a lot of spiritual bypassing in many different spiritual communities, but there is a particular instance and a particular individual and a particular situation and a string of events that prompted me to speak out. And naturally, in speaking out, that situation did come to light, and I did speak about it publicly in a small group of individuals from a particular community that I live in. And I chose a small group within that community to share with because I thought maybe I would get perspective from both sides. I knew that there was going to be resistance. I knew that there was going to be anger about putting this into a public space. I knew that the person that I was speaking about was not going to be happy with me. And I knew that his friends would probably protect him and would have something to say about it. And what came after was to be predicted, but also surprising with how many people didn't say anything, and how some of the feedback that I received on what I needed to show to prove that I could even state what I was stating when there were multiple facts that were listed. And I was told that my behavior was violent, that my words were violent, that I was shaming, that I was trying to cancel someone. And what I found interesting was my words were not kind, but I don't think that they were unkind. And I don't think my words were violent, but I do think I was speaking about violence. And I don't think that I was empathizing so much with the person that I was calling out, but that is because what I was seeing was habitual and was a pattern. And I was confused with why it hadn't been said before in a public space because it had been said so many times privately. And I had stated with many people, and many people knew this particular behavior. And it was just kind of laughed off of like, this is just how this person is, and this is just the situation. And so what came back at me was I was the angry, emotional, delusional, sitting on her high horse messiah bitch. And I didn't expect it to come so full force from the particular people that it did come from. But I definitely expected that it would come. And why I want to even say anything in this video and why I even want to share anything here is because I'm fucking fiery. I am fiery and I am energetic, and at times I can be reactive. I've gotten much better at being responsive, but I'm not generally scared to say the truth. And I will say that I didn't say anything for a year and a half of what I was seeing in a community that has seen this behavior happen for many more years than that. And so if I am afraid to say something, or at least have resistance, and maybe it's not fear, but a resistance to saying anything, can you imagine someone that is generally complacent or people pleasing, or has a wound around being seen or being heard or not being accepted in a tribe? Like, would they even have the space to speak up? And would we even allow that person to really have a space to speak up? Because I pretty much feel that I got shut down immediately, and I immediately had anger projected at me, and not one person. There were a few people that played neutral and wanted to be a bridge in the space and didn't want violence on either side. But no one just said, hey, you're right, I also see this behavior. No one said that publicly, but I got a lot of people that said it privately. A lot of people wrote and said, this person has been doing this for quite some time. This has been coming to them. They deserve this. And that came in privately, but no one said that publicly. And these were people that I really respect, like people in the community that are powerhouses saying this, but no one's saying anything. And this isn't to say there's a right and wrong way to deal with it. I was told by people I really respect and powerful sisters in the community that, hey, sister, you're trying to fight and you're not going to win by creating a war. And I thought, I'm not trying to create a war. I'm trying to raise a conversation. I want to have a conversation about these things. I want, when somebody is habitually out of integrity, I want them to be called into a forum and have a conversation about it. And I myself have been in these situations. And again, like why I'm speaking about this now, it's not to pinpoint a specific person, because I've met many people in spiritual communities that are spiritually bypassing a lot of their pain. I have met people in these communities that are really in their attachment wounds, that are just draining one another, that are distracting themselves with sexuality and escapism and not going into the darkness or the shadow or shifting or evolving. If anything, just becoming more righteous in their entitlement. And I really sat with myself, because there will be people that watch this and they will say, you're the entitled one. You're the righteous one. You're the one making a video and posting it on your social media. And what I want to say is, I can promise you, and it doesn't matter if you believe me or not, I sat with myself and I really sat with, what is my intention here? Why do I want to speak of this? Is this at all to advance myself or to make myself holier than thou? Is there ego wrapped in this of the justice warrior? And whereas subconsciously, for sure, I imagine that there is the subconscious warrior feminine that is just super fucking tired of being in communities where the feminine is taken advantage of. And this doesn't just mean female bodies, but this trusting and surrendering energy that gives and that allows, that is constantly taken advantage of and just absorbed and discarded. I don't understand how that's spiritual. And in all honesty, in a lot of these communities that I've lived in, and again, it's not just one community, but within the last few years, I've lived in polyamorous communities where we are preaching like one love and openness. And I threw myself into it for the past 3 years. You know, I didn't dive deep with multiple people, but in the few connections that I had, I committed to looking at my own comparison, my own jealousy, my own anxious attachment, my own insecurities. I threw myself into just opening my heart and loving to the best of my ability unconditionally. And you know what I received? Like, yeah, I received some beautiful connections, but I also received more avoidancy that I've experienced my entire life in connection with the masculine, whether it's in cities or spiritual communities. But what was worse about it in spiritual communities, and I experienced this with my first like aha moment dating a modern day medicine man that so many people loved and respected and like went to be healed by, that saw him as their God and their healer. He ran away. Like he ran away from his lack of integrity, his deception, his betrayal in our relationship. And he never spoke to me again. He never apologized. And now he's leading retreats on safety. He's out in the world leading retreats on safety with people coming in and sitting in the medicine work and sitting with him and this man that has a string of women just like myself, his ex-partners, some that I'm friends with, that have experienced this with him that haven't gotten that closure and that have experienced deeply narcissistic tendencies to completely avoid and project all the accountability onto one person. And so what I want to say is like, why are we so challenged with being called out? Because I will say, when I got called out for being codependent and jealous and graspy, I looked at that. And you know where I went to look at it? In spiritual communities. I went to dance in temples and I went to do shadow work workshops and I did lots of psychedelics in order to integrate my shadow. And I saw, and within disgust of myself, my codependency, my graspiness, my peacocking nature to absorb and to be the center of attention and to like pull energy towards me because I didn't love myself enough, that I didn't care enough and accept myself enough, that I needed that to come from somewhere outside of myself. And I worked on that for the past 3 years in these communities. I worked on that because I realized that that traumatized little girl that went in these communities to heal, that codependency really just came from a place of like wanting to belong, but it was unhealthy and it drained my partnerships. And I worked on that and I did the work to heal so that my new partners in life don't have to deal with that. But what I'm seeing in these communities, and I don't want to generalize because there are women in these spaces too, but I have seen so many men avoidant of doing their work and looking at themselves and seeing how they are using women as a coping mechanism and sexuality and polyamory to protect their fragile egos, to protect themselves from feeling the things that they feel and really going deeply into their own wounding and fully healing so that they can actually receive the feminine. So that all these women that they're having sex with and all these sex parties that they're going to and all of this, playful, joyful, tantric ecstasy can actually be enjoyed because there's never enough. I've experienced this with a lot of males in the community. It's never enough. You need more, more, more. There's always another beautiful woman to connect with. There's always another beautiful woman to like have as the star on your arm and to be the man, to be the king that has his queen on his arm. And the thing is free love and openness and polyamory, this is all beautiful, but we have to look at the fact that people are actually really losing their faith and their trust in these communities where they go to heal. They're going to these spaces and seeing that people aren't going to show up, that their partner is not going to show up, that they're not going to be chosen, that they're actually going to be discarded and they're going to be replaced, and whatever pain exists within them is going to be solely on them to deal with. And whereas we are all accountable, and this is what we preach in these communities, we preach sovereignty, we preach that accountability, when did we stop relying on each other? Because I know I didn't go into these spaces, and I most definitely didn't date medicine men and therapists because I hoped that I would experience this kind of a lack of integrity. I went into those spaces and those connections because I thought I was going to experience something different than I had experienced in the cities that I lived in and coming from Texas, which is a super conservative state. But honestly, some of the behavior in these communities that are preaching to everyone and that are teaching are worse than I've experienced in the unconscious communities that I lived before, because we don't shame and we speak nonviolently and everything is love and light. But the reality is, when violence happens in these communities and we're talking about breaching ethics and not doing things in a consensual way and pushing boundaries and just pressing and pressing and pressing women or men to a place where they just kind of give in and they say yes when they're not a full yes, because we're openly sexual, and to be sexual is to be free and liberated. So to preach that and almost to shame someone for not being deeply in their sexuality and being so open and being so polyamorous when it's not what they really desire or feel safe in their body. Why is this behavior not being called out? I don't understand that. And I'm not going to get into the deeper details of how unethical it can get, because we know. And if you're watching this and you live in these communities or you live in the world and you're in a human body, then you've somehow been on one side of the table at some point or multiple times. But what I can say as a woman in a female body that desires to surrender and to trust her lover, or to trust her lovers if she chooses to be in a polyamorous space, I'm not choosing multiple lovers because, and this is my personal desire, because I want to explore more sex and have more sex. I go into those spaces because I want to hold in love. I want to experience deep love, and I want to hold space for people, and I want to be accountable with how they feel and how they feel once our connection is no longer a connection. But what I'm seeing in these communities is we're just tasting things. We're going in and we're calling ourselves Tantric, and we're going into spaces and we're tasting all the flavors. And then when that gets boring, when the person has emotions or a responsiveness to what you're doing that affects them, all of a sudden they're emotional, they're crazy, they're reactive, they're violent, when we're not looking at the reactivity, the violence, and the unethical behavior of our own selves. And so I'm lucky to be in a place right now where I don't feel like a man will be able to put me in that space, because my boundaries are so walled. But I don't want to be walled. I want to trust. I want to be able to surrender. I want to feel safe enough to trust a lover. But sadly enough, in most of these communities, I haven't found a man that I trust and that I could surrender to. I found many women that I can trust and surrender to, but my brothers, like, where? Like, where are you? And I know that there are so many incredible men that are in integrity. So this is not to bash men, and it's not to say that it's always male behavior. But in these communities, when you have so many beautiful women there to allow and to surrender, honoring the feminine, like honoring the feminine. And when somebody has an emotion and a reaction to something that you've done that you know is unethical, the least that you could do is not call them crazy or emotional. And this is what I'm seeing happening to my sisters. Like, when my sisters try to speak out, they immediately get silenced as, you're emotional, you're too sensitive, you're codependent, you're graspy. I didn't want that. You were delusional and like that. But the language that is used in order to draw these women in paints a different story. And I've been in these relationships before where men paint the castles in the sky and they say, I'm going to do this and that. And they're promising all these things that they're not living or embodying. And these are teachers. These are leaders. These are conscious music creators. And I'm just like, if we're in that space of spirituality, do we not hold ourselves to a higher integrity? Because I feel I do. And maybe that's the issue, is me having an expectation that when I live in these communities that offer conscious spaces and healing spaces, that means something to people. Because I know it means something to a lot of us. And I love the communities that I'm in. I must say that. I don't want this to be a bashing of any places that I live, because there's goodness there. But there's also shadow, there's escapism, there's avoidancy, and there's this desire to spiritual bypass violence by love and light language. And I'm sorry, but if you breach boundaries unethically multiple times to the point where it is a pattern, you don't get to receive, at least for me, like a super sweet, like, oh, I'm sorry, this affected me in this way. Here, let me give you my empathy. Sometimes the sword comes out, and the direct truth is just as painful as your repeated actions. So, why must we be so gentle with people that have behavior that is habitually disharmonious, like fragmenting, and in some ways abusive and violent? Because I can get that from cities. But if I'm going to live and leave society in a way to be in these spaces, I desire us to keep one another integral. We have to call each other out. And if we're not calling each other out, we're just as culpable, in my opinion. If you're seeing something that's habitual, not just one instance, and it's not going around finger pointing and blaming everybody for being a perpetrator. I don't want people to be in a space of perpetration, but I want to be able to say, hey, this behavior is not okay. Can we look at it? Can we bring this in front of a group of people and can we talk about it? Because it's not okay. And this is how we self-govern, and this is how we regulate and co-regulate together. And these are the kind of communities that I want to live in. And I find little portions of 5 to 10 people, but in the grander scales of the big spiritual communities that we're all going to, so many of us, to dance and to experience neo-tantra and step into sacred sexuality, in a lot of spaces, I'm seeing more damage done to people that aren't ready yet to be in that place. People that come with, they've just like gotten their hearts broken, or they've gone through a disease, or they have left their family because they don't feel accepted there and they're looking for their tribe, and they go and their hearts are open and their eyes are big, and boom, they become the target because they're so shiny and they're so excited and joyful, and that energy just is just like a vampire taken out of them. And then they lose hope and they lose faith, the very thing that took them through one breakdown to come into. And yes, they're accountable for their own choices. We're adults, we make our own choices. But can we just try to rely on each other a little bit better? Can we rely on one another's integrity and transparency and ability to hear the truth? Because in speaking the truth and not doing it in a super, beautiful, kind, loving, peachy pink way, I've become the perpetrator by speaking out to behavior that I feel to be perpetratory. So I find myself now sad because I love the places that I live in the world. I love the communities that I've been a part of. And when I speak the truth, it's not because I want anybody to be canceled or that I want people to feel bad or to shame someone, but I just want it to be better because we can do better and we can treat each other better, and there are better ways. And I want to be able, like a real family, to speak that without being called intense or responsive or crazy or a bitch. And at this point, if that's what's going to be called back at me, then so be it. This is not a place of the hero. That got projected at me already, that I'm being the Messiah. And I just have to say, me saying this doesn't make my life easier. But I know the real live human women that communicate with me that have been torn apart and in many ways had their bodies disrespected to beyond boundaries that I think we should even be playing with. And to be called emotional and crazy and to not be held in that pain, and it's basically just said, that's your problem. You take accountability. You made that choice to be with that person. This is their behavior. That is mad making. And I'm not even that woman in this moment, but I have been her, and I have stayed quiet, and I haven't said anything about that man in my life. And now when these women try to even whisper something, boom, it's just silence immediately. And so from here, I don't know what to do. And all I know that I've put myself in a vulnerable situation. And I was told today, you're self-sabotaging by talking. And I'm like, well, is speaking my truth and asking somebody to take accountability for their actions and to be in integrity means that I'm outed from a community or exiled, then that's not my community anyway. And that shows me the fragility of that, and how at some point when life does get challenging, because it does, that I'd be outed anyhow. So that's where I feel. And also to know that there are many people that will reach out and say that they don't support that being spoken out or being publicized or being shamed. But there are many people that stay silent, that agree that something needs to be said. There are many people that are quiet because they don't feel like their voices matter. And so if you're asking yourself, if you're in a situation similar to this, like, who am I to say anything? Who are you not to say anything? So, yeah, I feel affected today. I felt really sad today. I felt really misunderstood today in the communication that I put out about wanting this to be in a conversation. And I just have to trust. I just have to trust that speaking my truth and knowing that it comes from an intention of just wanting accountability on all sides of the table, that some good will come from it. And maybe it won't come from it in this exact situation. And maybe I'll be the odd man out that will be misunderstood and left behind. But that wound of not being loved and not being accepted and being abandoned, I've healed that to a point of, it's still there, of course, but I've healed it to a point where I'm not going to not speak my truth anymore because I'm afraid that I won't be loved or that I won't be accepted, because I love myself enough and I accept myself enough to know that I will survive. And I didn't always know that. And it did feel like public ostracization was death. And to not be a part of the tribe and not to be the people pleaser and the peacekeeper and to be the nice one was to die, was to just, like, in that moment, just dissolve. And I'm past that. So maybe that's why I can finally say something, because I never said it for myself and no one ever said it for me. And I wish that they had, because in those moments where I was made crazy for what I was experiencing, I never felt so alone in my life and so done with the human experience and in so much pain of how my brothers and sisters didn't show up for me. So if we can all just show up for each other a little bit more, that would be beautiful. The right people will see this. The right people will be making their own messages like this. And we're all the right people. Again, this is not a judgment, but I'm just saying the right eyes will see this. And if it makes you angry, that's great. If it makes you happy, wonderful. But for me, the whole purpose of sharing it is because I need to just speak my truth for me and put it there, because I've already put this stuff up on social media before. So this is more of the full story. And I don't need anybody to agree with me. If you do, beautiful. And if you don't, challenge me. Like, show me a better way. Show me a better way that can really call out unethical behavior that works, that really works when it's not just direct. Show me a better way. I'm open.